And joining you now is Sarah Torian, a Chief Learning and Engagement Officer with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy.
Thanks so much, Sierra. And welcome, everyone. Welcome back. Welcome to the new school year. My youngest actually just started her first day of high school today, so I'm really feeling the start of the school year right now. But it's wonderful to be with all of you today. I hope that you've all had a good summer and then maybe are starting to reach for long sleeves as the weather is starting to cool off a little bit. We at the Campaign for Grade Level Reading are also returning from our own little hiatus after some weeks of rest and rebroadcast after GLR week in July. And I'm delighted that we are starting off the season with such a strong session today with a remarkable set of guests. When school starts, there's often a little bit of a refresher, relocating on what we have learned and where we are and what we are up to. And in the same vein, I thought I'd take a moment at the beginning of this important session to kind of relocate folks who are joining in into what we've been thinking about and what we've been doing at the campaign. From the outset, the campaign's mission has been to make a real contribution to disrupting generational poverty. Our strategy has been to zero in on early learning and student achievement as a critical part of the pathway to progress for young people growing up in economically challenged families and in historically marginalized communities. Because of the evidence about the enormous impact of being able to read well and proficiently by the end of third grade, we have made that our focus and our accountability metric. Working with a large network of local and national leaders, we have successfully established a national goal around grade level reading. We thank all of you for being a part of that effort and for committing to that goal alongside us. As you know, consistent with the animating purpose of the campaign, we've paid special attention to the gaps and disparities in student achievement, and especially to the academic progress of young people from economically challenged families and those who are growing up in historically marginalized communities. We've made it our business to bring attention to the challenges, the barriers that stand in the way of academic achievement. And at the same time, as enumerating those challenges, we've also devoted ourselves to seeking out the bright spots, learning from them, and highlighting successful strategies to accelerate early learning. Working with our broad coalition, we have encouraged leaders at all levels and in all sectors, including the federal level, to make student achievement a top priority. And as you know, we focused on data because understanding student achievement necessarily means knowing how kids are doing. And knowing how kids are doing means data. Similarly, knowing what's working for kids means data. This year, we have spent a lot of time with the data from the most recent NAEP report. But that's nothing new for the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. The campaign has been using data from the beginning, data around early learning, data around chronic absence, and then, of course, data to sound the early alarm and issue an early call to action around learning loss as the pandemic unfolded, building on our history of data looking at and understanding summer learning loss. Throughout the years, we've been doing these webinars. We've highlighted data to understand how kids are doing, to dig deeper into what is working and what is not, to identify and highlight bright spots. Some of those bright spots led us to identify some of the big bets and smart investments that we've been promoting in our civic action and advocacy agenda. And while we've devoted a lot of time this year to a deep dive on the most recent NAEP data, today we're going to a higher altitude to think about the role of the federal government in promoting and driving student achievement, with a special focus on the federal government's key role in data and research. Today's topic is neither random nor fanciful. It's no secret that today we are seeing and experiencing and debating the possibility of very substantial changes in the role of the federal government in general, and with respect to data collecting and reporting and research in particular. That is as true in the domain of education as it is in other domains. And today we are incredibly fortunate to have a special set of guests to help us explore the federal role in driving student achievement, including the role of federal data collection, analysis, and reporting. Thanks for joining us for this conversation today. And with that, we'll get into it. I have about 1 million questions for our guests for today, and I'm sure that all of you who are joining in do as well. So I encourage you to put those questions in the Q&A box as they come to your mind, and we'll work to incorporate your questions into the flow of the conversation. And with that, I'm pleased to welcome and briefly introduce our guests. And as always, their full bios. And let's be clear, the folks who are joining us today have incredibly rich and long bios. They are linked in the chat. So I'm just previewing who we have with us today, but I encourage you all to dig deeper into their expertise and background by looking at those longer bios. At the top of the show, we will be joined by two former U.S. Secretaries of Education. John King Jr. is currently the Chancellor of the State University of New York, SUNY, the largest comprehensive system of public higher education in the United States. John was Secretary of Education under President Obama from 2015 to 2017, and then he led our partner organization, the Education Trust. Margaret Spellings is President and CEO of the Bipartisan Policy Center, a not-for-profit organization that supports policymakers working across the party lines to craft bipartisan solutions. In addition to being Secretary of Education under President George W. Bush from 2005 to 2009, she also served as a White House Chief Domestic Policy Advisor and President of the University of the North Carolina System. After talking with John and Margaret, we will turn to an exceptional group of education leaders to respond and share their own insights and comments. For that, we will be proud to welcome Adam Gameron, who is the president of the William T. Grant Foundation, which is the leading philanthropy that invests specifically in research to improve the lives of young people, including extensive research in education. Also happy to welcome and introduce Mike Petrelli. Mike is the president of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute and a close friend of the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. When he's not participating in our webinars, Mike is the executive editor of Education Next, editor-in-chief of the Education Gadfly Weekly, host of the Education Gadfly Show podcast, and a contributor at Forbes.com. He is an expert on charter schools, school accountability, evidence-based practices, and trends in test scores and other student outcomes. And also happy to welcome and introduce Ruth Lopez Turley. Ruth is professor of sociology and directs the Kinder Institute for Urban Research at Rice University, which brings together data, research, engagement, and action to improve lives. In 2011, she founded the Houston Education Research Consortium, a research practice partnership between the Kinder Institute and 11 Houston area schools or school districts, representing over 700,000 students. She also recently served on the National Board for Education Sciences from 2022 to 2025. Thank you all for joining us today. Again, we want to incorporate questions from our listeners throughout this conversation, so please put those questions in the Q&A box and we'll do our best to channel those questions to our guests. So John and Margaret, love to start off with you today. Margaret, if you can turn your camera on.
I'm trying to, but it says that the host has disabled my video.
Oh, host, let's help us out here.
Okay.
There we go.
All right.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you both so much again for joining us for today's conversation. I'd like to start out talking about student academic progress and achievement. Both of you made this a center pole of your leadership at the Department of Education, and you know this is a central focus of the campaign. I think we'd all agree that we've kind of lost focus, kind of taken our eye off the ball to a certain degree. What do you think it would take to get back on track, to once again make student achievement for each and every student a top priority for the country?
Morgan and I have done this several times together, so I'm going to defer to her to start because I think she is a very strong opener on this.
Well, thank you, and thank you all for what you do. I was vigorously nodding my head, as I know John was, and it's a treat to be in league with the people who are on this program today, because we were mostly in violent agreement about the importance of reading, and furthermore, the importance of a federal role therein. You all have a strong equity agenda, and our shared thesis as a country since LBJ has been that we needed a federal role that could make sure that we were holding ourselves accountable about the needs of every single student, irrespective of condition, zip code, or other modifier. And we've done that, and we know how to use the federal role in smarter and not so smart ways. And when we focus like a laser on priorities like reading that people understand, when we elevate and campaign, to use your word, for research-based practices, we can move the needle for all students, and we have. And at risk of being a Texas braggadocio, and shout out to my friend Ruth, my fellow Houstonian, when we focus on every kid, we measure, yes, that's testing. We report that data, we hold it up, we learn from it where we can, and we make it a central part of what we invest in. We go in the right direction. And all you have to do is take a look at the NAEP data from in the 16-year period or so, from Bush through Obama, and we were going in the right direction. Was it perfect? Hell no. But we were going in the right direction. And then before COVID, yes, before COVID, we started to slip. And in my view, the reason that we did that is because we stopped using federal policy and other policies around the country in a less muscular way. We took our foot off the gas. The fine print took hold. We embraced, and we're, I guess, maybe going to further embrace it, local control. I'm a big local control person, but folks, it's not against the law to improve student achievement. And we know how to do it in smarter ways than others, using federal investments, a federal role, and the federal bully pulpit.
I agree with every word that Margaret said, and it's a pleasure to be in this community of people who are committed to improving reading performance throughout the country. The two things I would add, one, we need to rebuild the coalition that supported the education accountability and equity agenda. And that coalition was in many ways anchored by unlikely bedfellows in bringing together the civil rights community and the business community. And that partnership at the federal level and in states was incredibly powerful, able to speak to legislators on both sides of the aisle, able to command public attention, focus public attention on where the performance gaps are, what we need to do to close those gaps. And that coalition then was able to bring parents into the conversation in really powerful ways to drive an agenda. And we need to bring that coalition back. In many states, you see both sides of that coalition hesitant to speak to education issues, but at the end of the day, we cannot address civil rights disparities if educational opportunity is not equitably available. And at the end of the day, for every employer, they will not have the workforce we need if we do not provide students with the foundational skills, particularly in English and math, although obviously students need much more than that. But if they don't have those things, they surely aren't going to be successful in the workforce. So that's one. The second point I would make is we need leadership. And I am heartbroken about how little you hear about educational outcomes from our leaders. And that's both sides of the aisle, that's federal and state. This is just not on people's radar screen the way it was. You think back to even President George H.W. Bush and Governor Clinton together talking about the importance of educational outcomes. Where's that? Where's that 1989 energy today? And we really need our leadership to step up and restore the sense that improving educational outcomes is a national imperative.
So today's conversation, as you know, is really about zeroing in on the federal role and reestablishing student achievement as that central goal or of our educational endeavors. So how do each of you see the federal role in setting and pursuing goals around student academic progress?
It's interesting to me that, there's a lot of discussion really not about eliminating a federal role, but about, slicing and dicing and assigning and relocating and kind of the bureaucratic niceties about who should oversee what program, what the contract or compact is between feds, states, local districts, et cetera. But I guess there's agreement that there should be a federal role. And so then the question is the most urgent thing before us right now the niceties of bureaucratic structuring, or is the more urgent imperative student achievement? We're about to get the NAEP data in just a few weeks, and I'm going to bet anybody on this call a pitcher of margaritas that it's not going to be terribly encouraging. Because we, see previous paragraph, we've taken our foot off the gas. We're talking about all manner of things other than how well do our kids read? And so we have a federal role. We're going to have a federal role. And then the question becomes, how do we keep the main thing the main thing? If your house is burning, it's not time to remodel. And when we do get to that, how should we organize ourselves? Let's do that around a plan, a strategy. And during the Bush administration, in the aftermath of 9/11, we had a very bipartisan conversation about how to organize our national security apparatus. The Homeland Security Department was created. We looked at the lack of information flows across various actors. There was a plan, and we created a bureaucratic response to it. So I think that's a good model for us now. We know times are changing. We know things can be improved. What needs to be at the Department of Labor versus the Department of Education? Does the SBA or the Treasury make sense for running student loan programs? Maybe, but for the moment, let's focus on student achievement and everything that means for our country. And if we are ready to have conversations around structures, let's do it around a coherent plan. And that's why we at the BPC have created this Commission on the American Workforce, co-chaired by Bill Haslam from Tennessee and Deval Patrick, two former very skilled, able governors, and populated with people from all around the country, because we think, first things first, but the main thing, and the main thing is what you're working on, and that's reading.
What would you add, Jen?
Two things I'd add that I think the federal role in data and evidence is hugely important and in jeopardy. And I'm worried about that. I'm worried about the health of the NAEP. I'm worried about the defunding of IES. I'm worried about our ability to have good information about where we're succeeding and where we're struggling. We've talked so much in the world of reading instruction about the Mississippi Miracle. Well, we wouldn't know about the Mississippi Miracle if we didn't have NAEP data to tell that story. We also need the NAEP data to know where we're stalling the most, where we're struggling the most, so that we can intervene. So that federal role in data and evidence building, critical. I would extend that evidence building to, we need more evidence around what works. Things like the What Works Clearinghouse are very important so that we have a better sense of what are the interventions that help English learners the most? What are the interventions that work best for the middle school or high school student who's really behind? What are we seeing for students with disabilities, particularly dyslexic students, that's working really well? And so we need that research function, and that too is under attack. So that's one area. We need that federal role there. The second area I'd emphasize is we need federal resources invested in places that are struggling economically. And this isn't just cities. This is rural communities that are very high needs. The Title I program is hugely important. These are dollars that are going to districts that couldn't generate those dollars themselves. They just don't have the tax base. And so if you go back, as Margaret did, to Lyndon Johnson, to the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, to the vision for that federal role, it was about trying to get resources to the highest needs places, because we can't afford as a country to lose out on the talent of those kids. And so that federal role also is something that we have to prioritize in this moment.
Can I just add one quick thing
Yeah.
to that? If we get rid of data and research, if we don't have a problem, we don't need a solution. And if we don't have a problem or a solution, we don't need money. So, I'm worry when, people who've railed against testing and railed against a focus on academic achievement around math and reading, may be hoisted on their own petard when we get to a place where there is no federal investment in this incredible opportunity that we have to fully leverage the human capital, the talent of this country in a time when the workforce is changing arguably more than ever in the history of the world through AI and whatnot. This is a time when we should be stepping up our game to the maximum extent possible, not thinking, who cares? So it's a very, very worrisome time. And I think, amen to John and the recreating the coalition. That's what you're doing here at the campaign. And John and I are glad to be part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, both of you kind of talked about history in the federal role. So can we talk a little bit about the special nature of the federal role in education in terms of civil rights history and its current relevance there? And John, if you could start off on this one, and then I'd love to hear your additions to that, Margaret.
Sure. Look, I always point folks to the famous Norman Rockwell painting of Ruby Bridges, because that's an iconic image that comes immediately to mind. And immediately you see in your mind's eye Ruby Bridges there at the center. But who's around Ruby Bridges? U.S. Marshals. Well, why U.S. Marshals? Because New Orleans and Louisiana did not want to provide Ruby Bridges with the equitable education to which she was entitled. So there has been this crucial federal role in enforcing civil rights. You think about the Office for Civil Rights at the U.S. Education Department, the work they do. It's a place you go if you've been discriminated against on the basis of race or sex or disability. Huge share of the cases that are processed by OCR are about families whose kids with disabilities are not getting the services they're entitled to. So you need that federal infrastructure to make sure that states and districts are doing right by kids. Now, sometimes it's because states and districts don't want to do the right thing. Sometimes it's because they are inadvertently creating these disparities. I remember we had a case when I was secretary in OCR where we looked into a community where there was a STEM magnet high school, and there were very few, almost no Latino students at this STEM magnet high school, even though there were a lot of Latino students in the district. And one of the things that we found out is that the information went home only in English. And so for many Latino parents for whom English was not their first language, they couldn't access this opportunity for their kid. I don't think somebody sat in an office and said, I want to figure out how to keep Latino students out, but inadvertently, their policy was having that effect. And OCR worked with them to change their outreach strategy. So they were reaching out to all of the kids, all of the communities within their district. So that federal role is critically important. And again, it is under real jeopardy. We've seen a huge reduction in the staff of the Office for Civil Rights. And I don't think states and local districts are going to make up for that. And so we need Congress to say, this is an important role. This is an important federal function. We're going to fund it.
Yeah, I just, it's having been a university president that, and John gives one good example about a charter school, but I think people do not fully appreciate the volume and the nature of the kind of cases that come to the Office of Civil Rights. And it's a very unique remit. It's, the Justice Department or whoever else might have expertise or interest in these sorts of issues. It's a completely different kind of interface. And along with all the other things that the Department of Education does, whether it's research or data or funding disbursement or school safety, on and on, that, I just think it's a place where not only do we need a federal role, we need a federal role that understands the various pieces of the business and the context that it operates in, and that the smartest way to do that is to have a federal Department of Education who has a clear understanding about what those obligations are and can enforce them, whether it's interfacing with a parent with a special needs child or a victim of sexual assault on a university campus and everything in between. And so it once again elevates, what are we trying to do here? What are our shared beliefs around this function? And how should it get elevated, managed, and led? And I'm pretty confident that the American people continue to have a keen interest in this as a priority.
I'd like to hear what each of you think about the most important elements of the federal role in driving towards supporting and really kind of creating accountability with respect to student academic progress in terms of the power of the bully pulpit. I think both of you have referenced that already, the role of data collection, research, analysis, and publicity, or the role of financial incentives and disincentives. What are the most important and how is that playing out?
I mean, in many ways, you listed out the things, right? The data and research are foundational. I would say one lesson, I think, of the last 25 years is we need a federal requirement for testing or it won't happen. And that, there are folks who want to get rid of the test. I do not think that would be helpful to kids or to the long-term health of our society. Now, does that mean that there aren't places where we have over-testing? Surely we do. And there are places where, they're giving interim assessments or these multiple choice online things, and they're giving them every couple of weeks, and it's overwhelming, and that's crowding out instruction. That's bad. We shouldn't do that. But we do need a clear requirement from the federal government that we are going to test, that we're going to find out, are students making the progress they need to, at least in English, math, and science. Now, if states want to add more on top, fine. If they want to look at social studies, great. If they want to have ways to look at students' career readiness on top, if they want to look at indicators of socio-emotional well-being, fine. But at a minimum, we do need a clear federal requirement that we are going to test in English, math, and science. And there was once bipartisan consensus around that, and we ought to rebuild that if we want to make sure that we hold ourselves accountable.
Well, and Sarah, as everybody on this call knows, I mean, that is one of the most powerful pieces of No Child Left Behind that was initially enacted now, 25 years ago. The two examples you gave are, in my mind, the spoonfuls of sugar that make the medicine go down, and that is obviously financial incentives and use of the bully pulpit, yay us and all of that. But the thing that drives student achievement is muscle behind policy that is enforceable and real. And what has happened in the more recent past, when I say take our foot off the gas, so there's no confusion, this is what I mean. A lax attitude around the fine print, defining the academic year in ways that allow a lot of kids to get out, exemption rates on at test days. It's cut scores and standards for curriculum that get watered down, and on and on. And that is the fine print that makes accountability a worthy muscle to drive performance, or fine print. And that's why we need a Department of Education, because the people who have the kind of expertise that can say, no, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus, are the people that do that. And that, whether people like it or not, that is what it takes. And it's not comfortable to call people out and say, you're not good enough. You need to up your game. And, it makes people squirm, but it sure did work for kids.
John, you were kind of talking about like the balance between over testing but the importance of kind of understanding how kids are doing. I'd like to hear both of you speak a little bit about, how we can strike the right balance in that around accountability and data, but the concerns of over testing, particularly when there's this moment now where there's this special sensitivity around the role of the federal government. And
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm a kid from Brooklyn, so there's always a risk in using an agricultural reference as a kid from Brooklyn. But I will say, there's a saying, you don't make a pig fatter by weighing it, right? So I do worry that in some places people have said, well, I know there's this test at the end of the year, so I'm going to turn my class into a version of the test, and that's what we're going to do every day until we get to the end of the year. Nobody wants that. And by the way, that does not help students do better on the tests at the end of the year. We want students to be engaged in discussion about fascinating text that they're reading. We want students to be doing science experiments. We want students to be solving interesting math problems. And we want at least once a year, like a checkup at the doctor to find out, hey, how are we doing? And that, to me, seems like a very reasonable baseline. There could be a lot of local variation in how they do interim assessments and all those kinds of things. But once a year, finding out where we are, that seems like just a responsible use of our resources, right? Don't we want to know? The other thing I would say is the tests have to be good, and that costs money, and we have to invest in them. And both in the Bush administration and the Obama administration, in different ways, we tried to put resources towards making the tests themselves good. That's important. That's a valuable federal role because some states don't have the level of resources that they might need. And it's important for the federal government to check, is this test a good test? If not, if it doesn't meet basic standards of reliability, then it's not real, and we can't treat the information as real.
And just probably a lot of people on the call know this, but in the House version of the appropriations bill, they've zeroed out the money for testing Title I assessment to states. I hope that won't stick over time. We certainly are going to be working on that. But again, I think for those that advocate that, they ought to think about, well, then what happens? Well, then what happens is let them eat cake. That's what happens. So, I just think there's no way to know where we are, to tend to the needs of our kids and our country without sound data on high quality measures. Can you overdo it? Hell yeah. But we're smarter than that now. We've been doing it for 25 years, and this is a place where you're probably going to have sessions on this, where online assessment and fuller ways to understand student achievement are coming to the fore. So let's go.
so some of the folks in the audience are asking questions around, to this point, like how can we get folks on board? How can we come up with bipartisan agreement around some of the actions and levers that you all are speaking about, ensuring that there are requirements around testing, making sure that it's in, there's investments in that, so that the kids who need it are getting the supports to help them succeed and get the academic achievement that we want.
Yeah, well, we can start by not changing the subject and talking about whether the SBA ought to, run the student loan program, I would say. So that let's to collectively decide that the most important thing for us to be talking about is the quality of education and how our students are doing in this wildly competitive AI innovating world. And so as we engage with our policymakers, again, this is a place, and for the moment we can do this, talk about the data. Okay, Texas, how are we doing? Are we going in the right direction or not? Where do we lag? In what subjects? And so, we just have to keep reminding people what's at stake, and where are we? And I think we can't do it enough. So that's what this campaign is about.
Amen to that. The thing I would add is, one of the greatest threats to accountability, I think, is people feeling like they don't know how to improve.
Mhm.
Because if people feel like they don't know how to improve, then they start to resent the accountability. It feels like a gotcha.
Yeah.
And we can do something about that, right? And this is the important part of the Mississippi story, right?
Mhm.
They intentionally, systematically directed resources and energy to capacity building.
Yeah.
We have to help teachers understand the science of reading so they can deploy it in their classrooms. That's one of the reasons at SUNY we created our Science of Reading micro-credential at SUNY New Paltz so that we could help current teachers who maybe didn't get the science of reading in their teacher preparation get capacity around that. High quality curriculum materials. That is another way that we can invest in capacity. So that doesn't have to be federal, right? So I'm not talking about the federal government handing out curricular materials, but states investing resources in high quality instructional materials, requiring districts to use their dollars on high quality instructional materials can help people feel like they have the capacity to improve. So now if I'm a teacher, if I've got good training and I've got high quality materials in front of me, then I have hope that when I see that the test scores aren't where I'd hope, I can do something about it. I can make progress. So part of the campaign has to be, yes, imploring people that we need the accountability and lifting up the capacity building that we know we have good evidence can make a huge difference in outcomes.
Amen.
So going a little bit deeper into that, kind of how you think about the state and even local accountability. So we're talking about the Mississippi miracle, really the Mississippi Marathon, and how they really did invest in what they know, works and kept with it for a long time. But kind of thinking about state and even local accountability alongside the federal role and really focusing on academic progress.
Yeah, and that's why reading is such a front foot issue to engage on, and you can bring the politics together around reading. I'm pretty sure Democrats and Republicans all want their kids to read. Whether you're in Mississippi or Massachusetts, you want your kid to read. And so, uh, it's just a compliment to state and local efforts. And, I'm so encouraged by, 30 some odd states have passed research-based reading, evidence-based reading laws. What Mississippi did, and Alabama and Louisiana and others, they had fidelity of implementation that recognizes all the pieces and parts, whether it's a credential from your public university system, the ongoing PD, the parent support, et cetera. And they were able to do it on a scale in those places where, if you know Kim Yana, she drove around Mississippi and said, now, was just on it. And so it's fidelity of implementation. We know what to do. We know what works. We know who needs help and how to help them. And so it's now on implementation. And so states believe that they wouldn't have passed these laws. And I think that's where the field, our practice, can really bring a lot to bear. And may I say, especially around teacher prep, which has been a little bit of an undone piece of this. We've done tons of PD, kind of retrofit, with hundreds of thousands, millions of teachers. But gosh, maybe we ought to embed some of this kind of thinking in our teacher prep programs.
And that was a key part of what Mississippi did, and it took courage, right? Because it's not necessarily popular to say to every teacher prep program in the state, you're going to need to change your syllabi to reflect science of reading. You're going to have some of your faculty deepen their expertise so that they can help students with these skills. But one thing I will say that I think is another place for kind of political leverage in this conversation that has made a big difference already in the science of reading movement is organized parents, and particularly the parents of kids with dyslexia have been a key part of the science of reading movement throughout the country. And I think if we can mobilize those parents as voices at the local school board level with state legislators, that's another way that we can kind of push states to not only say they're doing science of reading, but actually do science of reading.
Amen.
Well, thank you all so much. Number one, for this incredible conversation about the federal role around data and accountability and research, but also for setting the stage. You're kind of hinting at what the Campaign for Grade Level Reading is planning for later on in the fall, kind of, doing sessions around it's not just passing policies related to the science of reading. It's about implementation and what that takes. And so we'll be inviting Kimyana Burke to come and share what she's seeing in many of the states where they've been working and what that looks like. But thank you both so much for these incredible insights. I hope you'll stick around. We're going to invite our commentators in, but then we'll welcome you back to kind of a panel conversation closer to the end.
Thank you.
And so with that, I'd like to welcome Adam Gamerian, Ruth Turley, Mike Petrelli. Love to kind of hear your reactions to what we've heard from the secretaries, and also your own insights and ideas about what you're seeing around the federal role in promoting accountability and student achievement. Got several questions already outlined to ask each of you, but before we get into that, I just wanted to kind of do a quick round robin to capture your blink reactions on what you've just heard from John and Margaret. And we'll start with you, Ruth.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think the whole mission of the U.S. Department of Education can be summarized with two main goals, right? To promote student achievement and to ensure equal access. And both of those goals absolutely require high quality, ongoing, national level data. There's no way we can achieve that mission without really good national data. So I do share their concern that things are a bit jeopardized right now. So we need to do everything we can to address that. The other quick thing I'll add is that I do understand people's frustrations with the state of affairs right now. I think some people are taking their eyes off of national level data and research because they point to the huge disparities that continue, that have persisted for so long, and they're like, see, it's not working. But my response to that is twofold. One is we need to ask a couple of questions. One is, what's the counterfactual? Where would we be today? What would those gaps look like today had it not been for that data, that research that we've been using? And the other thing that I should point to is that we need to also ask about the connection between the data and the evidence and action. And just because there hasn't been enough action to produce the results that we want, it doesn't mean that the data are useless. It just means that we need to do more to improve that connection. And we are in that process. We are doing more, but let's have a little bit of patience in making sure that we can make that connection.
Love that. Adam, what would you add?
Well, what a pleasure. So refreshing to hear leaders from across the political aisle speak about the importance of the federal role in education. And if only we had that from our current leaders, but let's give 3 cheers for the leaders of the past and I hope the future who are expressing that role and showing us why education has been a bipartisan priority since 1867, when we started collecting educational statistics, and since the middle of the 20th century, when we started supporting education and research. It has been a bipartisan effort. And I think if we trace the flow of the comments from Secretary King and Secretary Spellings, we can see the importance of education statistics, education research, and educational evaluation. To take the example that received the most attention, because it's such a good example of the improvement in reading performance of children in the state of Mississippi, we had the NAEP scores, that's the educational statistics who told us what the dire situation was for decades and showed us the dramatic improvement. We had education research, much of it supported by the Institute of Education Sciences, on strategies to improve reading. And we had the role of applied research and implementation by the Southeast Regional Educational Laboratory. If you talk to people in state government in Mississippi, they say, how did you do it? One thing they point to is the regional laboratory whose contract was abruptly and capriciously canceled in the current administration. And then evaluation. We have studies that show us that these efforts, where they succeed, where they fail, and where they need to be improved. So that's just one example, but there are many examples. Special education was also mentioned. There's been tremendous contributions from research on how to improve outcomes, including achievement and other outcomes for children with special needs. That's a function of the federal role. And both speakers spoke compellingly about the reason that only the federal government can fill this need due to its resources and its ability to ensure equal access all across all states. So I just found it so refreshing, and it really set a great tone for this conversation.
Thank you for that. Mike, what would you add? What are your quick thoughts coming out of that?
Yeah, well, shoot, Adam was so kind there, and I feel like that's going to force me to be a gadfly, which is our moniker here at where I work at the Thomas P. Fordham Institute. Look, I have a ton of respect for Secretary Spellings and Secretary King, and yes, we always gave them a hard time when they were actually in office, but boy, do we miss their leadership now. I do worry, though, that we're all preaching to the choir. And so I think when we get into this discussion, we really need to start figuring out, like, let's be real about the politics. The politics have changed dramatically since the time, especially since Secretary Spellings served. I was in the Department of Education even before that. Look, we look back on that time fondly because it was possible to do a lot of bipartisan work. There were political incentives for both parties to try to win over people in the middle. A lot of those incentives have eroded, and we are now at a place where it's been many cycles where the politicians on, both Democrats and Republicans are encouraged to pay most attention to their base, for Democrats to move left, Republicans to move right. We've got, red and blue states that we didn't have that 20, 25 years ago. This notion that New York would forever be blue, and Ohio would forever be red. I mean, that's a pretty new phenomenon. That matters. So, when we really got to figure out if we're going to try to rebuild the coalition, how do we do that given the political reality that we are struggling with today? So I think we a lot of us here agree with where we need to go, get back, and Ruth said it nicely about what the federal role is all about. But look, I said this in the chat. I think Republicans, we've got to deal with how do we win some of these fights with the MAGA folks, and on the Democratic side, how the Democrats win fights with the teachers unions, and others on the progressive left. That's how we're going to have to get to where we want to go.
So just like with the policies are important, but implementation is what matters. You're reminding us that, it's when the rubber meets the road, like how can we actually get folks to get back to the place where we can find some.
Yeah, and look, here's what's difficult is that these larger political forces, they are outside of our control. They are above our pay grade. They are even above the pay grade of education secretaries, right? And what we didn't realize back in, say, the late 90s, early 2000s was how much the politics were helpful to us. We took it for granted. Other things too, child poverty was going down, education spending was going up. There were a lot of things going really well in the late 90s into the early 2000s that helped us, and some of those things then stalled out in the 2010s. So we've got to deal with the reality that we're focused on today in 2025.
Yeah, Sarah, if I could jump in response to Mike's comment, which I think is well targeted. I don't have any objection to anything you said. We do need to find ways to reach out to the realities of today. As you know, Mike, I chaired a committee of the National Academies of Sciences a few years ago on the future of education research at IES. And that report had two major themes, one of which I think is not going to go in today's environment. It was about centering equity in education research. But the other one I think is very current and very appropriate for our times, and that is the need to ground research in the needs and experiences of parents, communities, and learners, parents, teachers, and learners. We hear all the time the importance of parents driving education, the importance of education being responsive to parents, the importance of education research being responsive to parents. I couldn't agree more. And we know this from the education research standpoint because we find, and this is a concern about the education research up until now, is that too often we produce interesting findings, go on a shelf in a library somewhere, and don't actually make a difference in the real world. And one important strategy for getting evidence used is to ask research questions where we have constituents who actually care about the answers. And so I think that is one strategy for pushing work that could appeal to today's bipartisan possibilities and to help create a new coalition that is cognizant of the political realities of today.
So Ruth, coming back to you, we know you just recently served on the National Board for Education and Sciences. So can you tell us a little bit about the board, its responsibilities, and what you were working on and what you all were hoping to accomplish there? I think that's a good way for grounding.
And I would add, I was recently terminated from that board, which is
because of all the reasons that we're talking about.
Yes, I was just, to respond to Mike and the things that he was saying. I mean, that board is supposed to be a nonpartisan board. It oversees the research arm of the U.S. Department of Education, which is IES that Adam was just referring to. And yes, it's supposed to be nonpartisan, and yet we're deeply affected by what is going on politically right now. So, which is why I was terminated. Not just me, but the whole board. So we're 15 members on this board, and our duties are mainly to advise the IES director and to approve of research priorities and to evaluate the work of IES. And in particular, I served on a committee that was tasked with reviewing several reports that came out of the national academies, including the one that Adam was just referring to. And our job was to meet with all the commissioners and to go over exactly what they were doing in response to those recommendations and what they were planning to do, what they've already done, as well as what they were planning to do in response to those recommendations. So as the former secretaries were talking about earlier, I mean, yes, we had a long way to go. There's plenty of room for improvement, but we were definitely working on it and definitely making use of the resources that were available, again, in a nonpartisan way as much as possible, because we're focusing on research evidence, and that's what we were working on. And then it was all abruptly terminated with, I might add, a 2-sentence email.
So we were talking earlier a little bit about kind of the local use of federal data, and I know you have a specific perspective on that. Can you tell us a little bit about how important the NAEP data was for you in your work with the local schools and community in Houston?
Yes. Nationwide metrics have huge local implications. And one of the things that we did with our group here in the Houston region is that we were using national level data from the School Finance Indicators database, which uses NCES data, census data, et cetera, and used all of that to develop estimates for how much per pupil funding is needed for each school district across the country. And to be clear, this is not how much per pupil funding they get, but how much per pupil funding they need. And this is going back to the equity issue that we were talking about earlier. And we found two things. One is most school districts in Texas are underfunded according to these estimates. And let me be clear, is what they need in order to achieve national average test scores. So we found that most school districts in the state of Texas are underfunded in terms of what they would need to achieve national average test scores. But even more importantly, we found that there are some school districts that were severely underfunded relative to others, both in the region and in the state. And so there are huge inequities that we need to pay attention to. But unfortunately, right now, in Texas and in other places as well, although we have increased per pupil funding in Texas, I have to acknowledge that we've definitely been making some efforts to increase the funding. But we still need to address the inequities. That's a big concern. And right now, what they're mostly paying attention to is that they're instead of focusing on increasing the funding in order to improve student performance, that is kind of the other way around, where the state is pushing for improved performance in order to increase funding, something that they refer to as outcomes-based funding. So we're very concerned that they might have it a little bit backwards. Like we know what can improve performance. We do have research evidence that suggests that. So we need to increase that in order to get improved performance, not the other way around.
Can you build on some of Ruth's comments to kind of help us understand more specifically about why research is so important to student achievement and why the federal government is so important to generating that data that she was just referencing and supporting the research needed to make an impact on what is done in the classroom, especially in kind of thinking about what we know about the science of reading and ensuring effective implementation of that in the classroom?
Yes, I think there are two main reasons why the federal role is essential here. One is that only the federal government has the resources to address the major challenges in education, whether it's statistics, research, or evaluation, that will help us respond to the losses we've suffered in COVID and more broadly improve outcomes, meet the goals of the campaign for grade level reading. Only the federal government has those resources. The annual budget of the Institute of Education Sciences was $800 million. Well, still is $800 million. They haven't spent it, but that's the budget. And so just by comparison, a lot of people say, well, why doesn't the William T. Grant Foundation or the Spencer Foundation or the Gates Foundation pick up those things? Well, our whole endowment is $400 million. So if we put our whole endowment, we could fill in 6 months of what IES did. So only the federal government, no private funder, has the resources to fill the void abandoned by the federal government when they are refusing to spend the money that Congress has authorized. So only the federal government has the resources. That's number one. Number two, as the former secretaries were saying, only the federal government can ensure that there are ways of holding states, schools, and students, learners accountable that are meaningful across the country. So one of the things that No Child Left Behind did was it exposed the dramatic differences among states in the way they were examining the performance of students in different states and schools and school districts. And so as we transitioned from the Bush administration, the Obama administration, many of the policies held true, but there were incentives for elevating the benchmarks for performance. So only the federal government is capable of doing that. Now, we don't have a national test in this country, and we don't need a national test to hold all states and school districts accountable for promoting student achievement. But we do need some national benchmarks, such as the National Assessment of Education Progress, the National Educational Longitudinal Surveys, which track the performance of individuals over time, and these activities that states that the federal government can undertake, and states and local districts can interpret meaningfully.
So Mike, coming back to you and kind of that question of politics around all of this, how does the bully pulpit of the federal government and the president's priorities impact student achievement? And how did a backlash over testing, and federal overreach kind of lead to the breakdown of the focus on accountability and student achievement?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And look, it's a good question, and I don't want to keep being so sort of backwards looking, but I think it is important to understand the story of education reform to know where to go next. And I hear people say all the time that, well, No Child Left Behind, education reform, it didn't work. And that's why the coalition fell apart. Well, that's just not true. I mean, it did work in terms of seeing student achievement rise quite dramatically in the 2000s and into the 2010s and the 1990s as well. We saw high school graduation rates go way up. We saw college going and college completion rates going up. And that especially is something that would be, hard for K-12 systems to game. That one was very real. So something happened. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I don't think the education system and the education reforms get all the credit. There were other good things happening, especially that very strong economy in the 90s, more school spending. I think all of these things came together to help us get better outcomes for kids. But we did it. We were getting better outcomes for kids, especially for the lowest performing kids, until something happened in the 2010s. Now, Secretary Spellings mentioned that more or less the end of No Child Left Behind and then the transition to the Every Student Succeeds Act. That's a possible. That definitely did happen, and the timing more or less lines up. But look, by that point, the No Child Left Behind reforms had kind of run out of steam anyways, right? There were other things, phones. People are all of a sudden, now we realize, oh my God, we've given kids these addictive devices. And it was in the 2010s that, all of a sudden every child in America had one of these things in their pockets. Did that have an impact on their attention, on their sleep, on all kinds of things that would impact their learning? For sure, that might have been a factor, right? We had the Great Recession. We had, so we have all these different factors coming together. And we had opponents of reform that spent, millions and millions of dollars making this case that there was too much testing. Look, I think if we're going to get back to making progress again, we need to, first of all, acknowledge that a lot of these reforms, they were working. Some of them didn't go far enough. We didn't invest enough in building capacity at the local level, for example. We tried to do that through a program called Reading First. That's a whole nother story about what happened to that federal program. We're finally picking up on that again with the science of reading, this focus on high quality instructional materials. So that piece is good. And then we need to get back to that political leadership. And I think I keep saying this on the webinars that you guys host. What we should be paying attention to if we want to go forward, who's running for president for 2028 on both sides of the aisle. Okay, because look, we had George H.W. Bush and then Bill Clinton and then George W. Bush and then Barack Obama. Strong leadership at the presidential level meant a lot. And we have not had that with Donald Trump or Joe Biden. And so, to what degree will we get lucky again to have a real education champion, education reform champion? Hey, I'll take a Democrat or Republican. I don't really care. I just want somebody who prioritizes this again and is willing to, make take some political hits for it.
Wouldn't it be great to have two great candidates? There were education candidates on the right and the left.
It used to happen all the time. Yeah.
So Ruth and Adam, we're mostly talking about federal data as a vehicle for accountability today, but I think it's important to also touch on the importance of federal data in developing the knowledge of effective practice and as a key element of effective research to practice system. You've both been kind of everybody's been touching on that a little bit today. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of federal data in driving that new knowledge and supporting the adoption and the effective implementation of evidence-based actions?
Oh, sure. There's well, Adam did. Is it okay if I go first? I just wanted to say that there's a lot that has a lot of innovations and a lot that has happened precisely because of the federal role in both supporting research. IES has supported a lot, has funded a lot of research that has done some amazing things for the field of education. But again, people are saying that we haven't had enough progress, so why should we continue to invest? And I'm very concerned about that question, but I'm trying to be open-minded and understanding about that question. I can understand the frustration. And so to that, I would respond that we need to continue to invest not only in the research and the data collection efforts that inform this innovation, but also we need to invest in that connection and making sure that we are doing a good job of connecting that evidence with practice and action. And that connection is actually quite challenging in and of itself. The research is challenging to produce, but connecting it can also be really challenging. But we need to do both of those things at the same time. And if we do, then I think that we have a real opportunity to continue to inform practice through research, but to really do it in an exponential way. But I'm very concerned with we're getting our eyes off that target right now, and not really. I'm concerned that I hate to use this phrase, but that we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, by saying, okay, not enough progress has been made, and that people are then saying, well, then it's not worth it to invest in the research. And I would say it's the opposite of that.
It's knowing what works.
Let me build on that with two specific examples that are local challenges with national implications. And one example is a use of high impact tutoring to promote student learning and restore and even exceed where we were pre-COVID. And the second is responding to chronic absenteeism, which has grown to a crisis level since the pandemic. In both of these cases, we have specific research that details not only that tutoring is effective, but how to implement it properly, what types of dosages are available, what characteristics of tutors are needed, how much coordination is needed between the tutors and the teachers, and so on. And so we've got strong research, and we need adoption, we need implementation that needs to be brought to the local level. One way of doing that is through the education research practice partnerships that you yourself, Ruth, are such a leader, a national leader and a local leader in Houston, where the researchers can demonstrate the impact of policies adopted and can work on strategies for implementation. Likewise, with chronic absenteeism, there are a number of studies in the field now, and some of which have recently reported results about building student sense of belonging, about nudges and other strategies for reducing and combating absenteeism, a whole range of activities and incentives, carrots and sticks. And so we have a lot of knowledge about this, and we need partnerships between researchers and communities or school districts to put these research findings into practice and to evaluate them at the local level. Educators, school district leaders, decision makers in education, they don't just, if they say, well, I need tutoring, what should I do? I'll go to the research. No, they say, what tutoring programs have worked in districts like mine with communities like mine? And the research practice partnership is one, it's not the only strategy, but it's one strategy for helping to build that local knowledge, local trust, and bringing national evidence to bear in ways that are applicable at the local level.
And I would add, connecting the national evidence with the local evidence, and then it can really reinforce one another. In our case, we found that to be especially important for early childhood education, making the case for full day pre-K, just overwhelming evidence showing the importance of full day pre-K, and we just need to do more to invest in that.
So that's setting me up for the next question. Kind of thinking about this universe of education research that is so vast and large, kind of the local data and the state data and the national data that you were just kind of referencing, and the links between them, both Ruth and Adam. But then also, like, there's many education research organizations and special efforts like the Education Recovery Scorecard that really kind of blended lots of different types of data to really understand that crisis and chronic absence that you were mentioning, Adam. I think would be helpful for our audience to kind of better understand of the role of federally collected data in that overall constellation of all these different sources of education research and education data in driving kind of student achievement and student progress. So I'd love to invite each of you to kind of share your brief thoughts on kind of how to connect those dots and the value of kind of leaning into, you know, all the different stars in that constellation, if that makes sense.
I'll start. I think that there's in order to help us get back on track in terms of this goal or goals, the two goals that that represent the mission of the U.S. Department of Education. I think that there's a lot that we can do to make sure that okay, I'm just going to speak for the state of Texas for the moment. We often think that we're like we just have to focus on ourselves because we're such a big state, and that's true in some sense. But it's possible for us to think that we're providing adequate and adequate education and that we're providing equal access to everyone. But until we can make that comparison using national level metrics, we can easily be off track. And I think that some of our own research has shown that in many ways we are off track, and that we need to do more. We need to, in some cases, a lot more. So those, I feel like there's so much power and potential there as long as we make sure that we have the high quality national level metrics available, and that we're all making those comparisons and then applying them.
One thing we haven't talked about yet is the rich administrative data on education being collected at the state level. And if we could connect those, but the state level data are not enough.
Right.
If we could connect those state level data with national data, such as national surveys or other national data collections, then we could truly see the progress that is being made in the states, the different challenges that school districts in different states are confronting, the advantages of resources that are received in different states, whether federal or state resources. We can see how it all fits together. So that's one way of thinking about the constellation of education research and data.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would just add, if people don't know, my colleague Amber Northern is over at the Department of Education right now for a 6-month stint, helping to redesign the Institute of Educational Sciences. So, look, the fact that the administration brought her in as a serious research expert is a good sign that they seem to understand the value of it. Yeah. So just a little bit of optimism there. You know, I think we're all curious what the heck happened and why, you know, the administration allowed IES to get dismantled. But I think that's a story historians will tell about DOGE, and at least the people that remain at the Department of Education, certainly Education Secretary McMahon, see the value in research and data.
Mm-hmm. Any kind of, we're about to invite Secretaries King and Spellings back for the closing portion of this conversation, but just wanted to invite all of you to add any, if there's additional thoughts that you haven't shared that haven't come up in this conversation yet, in terms of that question that we started off this conversation with them kind of like taking our eye off the ball in terms of academic progress. And, you know, what it will take to get us back there in terms of real focus on the ball of academic progress and student achievement as a higher priority. And I know you've all kind of touched on this a lot throughout this conversation, but if there are any kind of other thoughts that you have not highlighted or lifted up, I'd love to provide a chance for that. And giving Margaret and John a warning that we'll be inviting them back in just a second as you share these thoughts.
I mean, sure. I fully agree. We've abandoned at the federal level our examination of education outcomes and progress, and we need to get back to that. I think there's strong agreement on the parts of leaders across states of all different political stripes. There's certainly agreement in the U.S. Congress, who insists on continuing with the funding for education, including education research. And we need the administration to bow to those realities.
I don't want to step on Ruth's toes in terms of the Texas piece, but I would say this. There are some states out there, and I would say Texas is one of them, that are still very much focused on student outcomes. A story in today's news about Mike Morath, the Texas commissioner, visiting, I think it was Fort Worth public schools, anticipating maybe another state takeover, just like he's done in Houston. It feels like 1999 all over again. This is the sort of thing that states used to do sometimes, was take over school districts that aren't getting the job done. It's probably the least popular, most politically difficult thing to do. And yet there are some states doing it. And frankly, and I don't mean to be partisan here because I wish it weren't so, these days it tends to be the red states that are more willing to continue this focus. If you want to see who still has A to F rating systems for schools, or 0 to 5-star rating systems, almost all of them are red states, with a couple of exceptions. Where are charter schools still growing? It's in the red states. Where is even science of reading going strongest? It's often the red states. So I think, I guess to John, I feel like the folks on the left have a particular challenge in figuring out, how to overcome the ascendant progressives and the teachers unions. I think that is a particular problem, especially at the state level.
Ruth? Oh, and just before you respond, Ruth, just wanted to flag to everybody listening in, we've just popped up our evaluation engagement poll. So just encourage everybody to continue listening in. We're just going to have this up. Just wanted to provide that early access to everybody so that you have time to fill it out if you have to run to your next meeting. But back to you, Ruth. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna respond to Mike's comment about the Texas situation and just say that I actually fully agree that there's a very important role for the state to play in these examples of school districts that have been underperforming. But research shows that a lot of this has to do with severe underfunding in these particular school districts. And so I would say that would be a great place for the state to start. And so while yes, Texas has definitely been doing more to increase student funding, I think that we still have a long way to go to ensure that it is actually adequate and equitable.
Here, here.
That notwithstanding, our friend Mike Miles in Houston has gotten some great results down there with the good combination of state and local urgency around student achievement, right, Ruth?
That's what we're seeing, improved test scores, and but we do need to do some research to analyze the specific levers that have led to those test scores. We'd be very interested in doing that.
Well, welcome back, Margaret and John.
I couldn't resist, sorry.
No. And
Texas
that's setting us up for the next
braggadocio.
question that I had for everybody, because this conversation has been so much focused on what some of the incredible challenges are in terms of, the federal role in research and data and how we're seeing kind of the trend downwards in student achievement. But at the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, we always try to stay or remain optimistic and look for the bright spots that can inform action and can kind of be, expanded so that we can see more progress around student achievement, especially for those children growing up in economically challenged families. So I'm really curious to hear from all of you about the rays of light, whether, the work that's happening in Houston and other places where that helps you remain optimistic, things that you are watching, promising signs that you're excited about and hopeful about seeing grow.
Well, I'll jump in just quickly and say, and I'll pick up where Mike left off, and that is that I do not believe that anything that has happened is forever and always and unsolvable. And I think this campaign, organizations like mine, leaders from around the country can make the case to the Congress and some in the administration that let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater, to use Ruth's phrase. IES, I think, can be improved and reinvented. We need the NAEP, and so how do we collectively become part of the solution, not part of the problem? Or else we will get run over. So we need to stay energized and motivated and collected together, because, while there's a lot of us on this call, we haven't always agreed 100%. I nearly fainted when Mike Petrilli said something nice about me. I think I'm going to recover, though. But anyway, we are, we're in the middle of the playing field, and I think there's more of us than there are on either side of the, we don't care, or we're too, beholden to an adult agenda, or whatever the issues are that are opposing us.
Mhm. John, what would you?
Yeah, I'd
Okay.
agree with Margaret. Look, I think that the fact that Congress is in a different place from the administration is a real source of hope. And we've got to make sure that members of Congress understand the issues and feel pressure, again, from that business civil rights coalition in their states to stick with it on the role of the federal government in education, particularly around accountability. Two hopeful things at the local level. I do think the science of reading work has real momentum, and not just in red states, blue states as well, and some places where labor has been a strong partner in the science of reading work. I think that's encouraging. But the proof will be in the pudding of whether or not the science of reading work happens in classrooms. And so the campaign and all the organizations represented here have to be vigilant in making sure that instructional practice is changing and we are measuring the impact of those changes for kids. The other thing I'm hopeful about, and Mike sort of referenced this, I think social media and technology has been terrible for reading, and there is strong bipartisan momentum around cell phone bans, and I am delighted about that. New York's cell phone ban is going into effect this very week as students are welcome back to school. I think that will be a boon for student reading success, and I think we'll also see fewer behavioral and mental health issues if we give students time away from the cell phones.
I hope you're right, because my teenage son was very disappointed by that. You might imagine. But I would add, so one thing that's really giving me hope right now is exactly this work that we've been focusing on over a decade now here locally, is research practice partnerships, where the use of data, the use of research can be really can be off-putting for a lot of people, right? Because it can be weaponized, it can be used as a gotcha moment for schools and school districts to embarrass people, etc. But if it's done in a close partnership where the goal is, we're here to work together to solve problems. We're not trying to point fingers at anybody. We're just trying to improve student outcomes. Once that happens, and especially at the local level where we can have really strong relationships of trust and really work on these really challenging problems together in a constructive manner, beautiful things can happen. Like school leaders and district leaders are much more open to what the research has to say, even if it's not, good news, but they're much more receptive to it if it's done in a partnership, in a really constructive manner. So that's something that we've really been working on locally, that we've learned a lot about, and that gives me a lot of hope moving forward.
And I would add, what gives me hope is that the changes that we've experienced in the last 7 months, 8 months are not irreversible, but neither is renewal assured. And we need allies on all sides. Congress was mentioned, the education community, the business community, the civil rights community, all need to work together. And there is content that we can focus on that will be appealing to multiple constituencies, including, as I said earlier, the need to ground education research in the needs and experiences of learners, communities, and educators. If we do that, then families can see the importance of education research. Education decision makers can use education research to better their children's experience and drive achievement and long-term success forward.
Yep. And just picking up on some of what's in the chat, Beth Gamba Steele mentioning Washington, D.C. after all these years, still doing incredibly well. And we can point to other places, right? Mississippi, the Southern Surge. New Orleans has been, of course, in the news with the Katrina anniversary. Denver had an incredible run there for a while. Charter schools in Tennessee getting strong results after the pandemic. So this stuff still works. We can still point to places where it's working, and we need to shout that from the rooftops.
Yeah. Amen.
Well, huge thanks, deep appreciation to each of you for joining us to shout from the rooftops and share the importance about kind of the progress that was being made and how we were able to make it, and the way that the federal government can help to drive that progress for students.